Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 3, Episode 14, where we unpack how much of who we are is wired into us and how much can be rewritten by emotional learning. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive, really getting into the fascinating intersection of our genetics and our lived experience. We're drawing on some really compelling insights from psychology and neuroscience. And the central question for you listening in is this: is our emotional destiny basically fixed when we're born? Or can our experiences truly actually reshape who we are, maybe even biologically? So let's start with this powerful idea from the sources. Temperament is not destiny. Now, when we talk about temperament, what do we mean? It's like that background hum, that background murmur of feelings that mark our basic disposition. And it's often thought of as something, given at birth.
That's right. And temperament, it really sets the tone, doesn't it? It defines the moods that are typical for us, our overall emotional life. It's kind of like part of our genetic lottery, as you said. Think about the work of Dr. Jerome Kagan at Harvard, a really renowned developmental psychologist. His work highlights how these innate tendencies show up. He identified, I think, four main types, but a lot of his focus was on the spectrum, from boldness all the way to timidity. And this isn't just about like personality traits, it's about these innumerable differences in temperamental endowment, which basically means people vary hugely in how easily an emotion gets triggered, how long it sticks around, and how intense it feels. These are rooted differences.
So how do we actually see these differences? Kagan's study gives us a great window, doesn't it? Picture this. Toddlers, just 21 months old, at Harvard's William James Hall. Some were described as bubbly and spontaneous, just diving into new things. But then you had others, the uncertain and hesitant ones, clinging to their moms, kind of quiet, maybe a bit overwhelmed. And here's the really striking part. They followed up about 4 years later when the kids were in kindergarten. None of the outgoing kids had become timid. But get this, 2/3 of the timid ones were still reticent, still shy. Kagan called this group about 15 to 20% of kids behaviorally inhibited. All right, guy. These are the kids who find unfamiliar stuff really unsettling. Might be finicky eaters, hesitant with new pets or places, shy with strangers. And as they get older, maybe more prone to guilt, self-reproach, even becoming paralyzingly anxious socially. The ones, maybe the quiet wallflowers or folks who dread public speaking their whole lives.
Yeah, and to make it concrete, Kagan used examples like Tom, the shy type, and Ralph, the bold type. When they interviewed them at 13, the difference was stark. Tom was tense, biting his lip, wringing his hands, gave really short answers. He remembered being painfully shy until around 11, even sweating just thinking about playing with others. His childhood fears were intense, house burning down, diving boards, monsters, that kind of thing. Ralph, totally different story. Bold, outgoing. At 13, he was relaxed, chatty, confident. No nervous habits. He hardly remembered any childhood fears, just a brief thing about dogs and maybe flying. Sociable, popular, never thought of himself as shy. And what's really fascinating is the physiology behind it. It's not just in their heads. Timid kids like Tom seem born with neural circuitry that makes them more reactive to even mild stress. Literally, their hearts beat faster than other infants in new situations. Those heart rate monitors on the 21-month-old showed their hearts racing with anxiety. Kagan believed this neurochemistry of timidity is linked to how excitable a circuit around the amygdala is.
Ah, the amygdala, the brain's sort of alarm center, right?
Exactly. So for kids like Tom, that circuit is easily aroused. This leads to avoiding new things, feeling more anxious. It's almost automatic. Whereas kids like Ralph, they have a much higher threshold for amygdala arousal. They're less easily spooked, more outgoing, and there's actual evidence. Shy people often have higher levels of, say, norepinephrine, which primes the body for action, or other brain chemicals activating the amygdala, makes their fear threshold lower. They also show heart rates staying high, longer under stress, higher blood pressure, bigger pupil dilation, even more norepinephrine markers in their urine. It's measurable stuff.
Wow. So it's physically manifesting.
Absolutely. Even how much they talk. Timid kids talk less. Kagan connects this to a specific neural circuit that controls the ability to vocalize. And the bigger picture here, something for you to consider, is that this early timidity isn't trivial. It puts them at high risk for developing an anxiety disorder like panic attacks later on, often triggered by normal teenage stuff, first dates, exams, especially around puberty when emotions are already heightened.
Okay, that paints a pretty clear, maybe even a bit concerning picture of that end of the spectrum. So if it's this ingrained, this biological, does that mean their fate is sealed? Does timidity just lead to anxiety? Let's shift gears a bit. What about the other side? The cheerful temperament. This offers a different angle, doesn't it? There's this amazing story in the sources about an Aunt June. Back in the 1920s, she went to Shanghai alone. Pretty bold for a woman then. Then she survived 5 horrific years in a Japanese prison camp in WWII, lost everything. Yet later, after a stroke left her partly paralyzed, she apparently laughed after a fall, saying, "Well, at least I can walk again." Incredible resilience. And this connects to Richard Davidson's work at the University of Wisconsin. He linked temperament to brain activity patterns, specifically in the prefrontal areas. He found greater activity in the left frontal lobe seems to correlate with cheerfulness, enjoying life, bouncing back, like Aunt June, whereas greater activity on the right side correlates more with negativity, sour moods, being easily thrown off. Kind of like Woody Allen's typical movie characters. Yeah.
Right, and Davidson's experiments really dug into this. He looked at volunteers with pronounced activity on either the left or right frontal side. Those with more right side activity often showed that negative pattern, seeing the worst, prone to funks, moody, kind of suspicious of the world, but those with stronger left frontal activity, generally sociable, cheerful, self-confident, really engaged with life, and their psych assessment suggested a lower lifetime risk for clinical depression.
Interesting. So a potential link to depression, too.
A strong one, it seems. Davidson found that people with a history of depression or newly diagnosed consistently had lower left frontal activity and more on the right, which, leads to speculation. Could therapy for depression aim to actually boost that left prefrontal activity? It's a compelling idea. And what's really key here, again, is how early this shows up. This tendency towards melancholy or being upbeat, just like timidity or boldness, emerges within the first year of life. It strongly suggests it's, genetically determined to a large extent. Davidson even studied 10-month-old infants. Their frontal lobe activity predicted if they'd cry when their mom left the room briefly.
Wow, that early?
Yeah. Crying babies had more right side activity. Calm, curious ones had more on the left.
Okay, so we had these really deep-seated tendencies, this wiring showing up super early. Is that it then? Is our emotional destiny fixed? Are we just stuck with the hand we're dealt genetically? Well, here's the really encouraging part, the big takeaway from Kagan and others. Temperament is not destiny. Even if traits are laid down from birth, we are not necessarily doomed. Phew. This is where the emotional lessons of childhood become so incredibly important. They can amplify or mute these innate predispositions. The key is the great plasticity of the brain in childhood. Its amazing ability to be shaped by experience. So for those timid kids, what really makes the difference? It's the emotional lessons and responses children learn as they grow, especially from parents.
It's fascinating how parental approaches differ and the impact they have. Kagan's team observed this closely. Some moms instinctively felt they should shield their timid toddler from anything upsetting, protect them. But others focused more on helping the child learn how to cope with these upsetting moments. And maybe counterintuitively, the protective belief seems to have abetted the fearfulness. It kind of robbed the kids of chances to learn how to handle things themselves.
So trying to protect them actually backfired a bit.
It seems so, whereas the learn to adapt approach helped them become braver, more resilient. Home observations back this up. Protective moms held babies longer during upsets, were maybe more lenient with limits. The other moms, often more emphatic, setting firm limits, giving direct commands, insisting gently on obedience.
Why does that firmness help? It sounds a bit harsh, maybe.
Well, Kagan suggests that learning to cope with a sudden, firm, "No, don't touch that," introduces a manageable dose of mild uncertainty. It's not overwhelming, but it's a small challenge. Repeating these provides continual rehearsals for dealing with the unexpected, which is exactly what fearful kids need to build confidence. They need practice. And when parents don't immediately rush to pick up and soothe the toddler over every little upset, the child starts learning to self-soothe, developing their own coping skills.
So they learn to manage it internally.
Precisely. Kagan concluded that mothers who protect their highly reactive infants from frustration and anxiety seem to exacerbate the infant's uncertainty. It essentially deprives timid toddlers of the very opportunity to learn to calm themselves, which underscores the point. No human quality is beyond change, even if it has a biological basis.
That's such a powerful point about early parenting. But what else helps timid kids become bolder? The sources also point to social competence, which isn't just popularity, right?
Not at all. It's about skills. Being cooperative, getting along with others, empathy, being generous, sharing, forming close friendships. Really crucial life skills.
Yeah, and the research contrasted these kids with timid 4-year-olds who didn't change much. Those kids tended to be less able emotionally. Crying easily under stress, reacting inappropriately, staying fearful, sulky, overreacting, having trouble waiting, being super sensitive to criticism. So what's the mechanism here? How does social skill help?
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Socially skilled kids just have more positive experiences with other children.
Right. More success builds confidence.
Exactly. And the regular repetition of such social success over many years would naturally tend to make the timid more sure of themselves. It creates this positive feedback loop. So if we tie this all together, the big message is pretty empowering. Fearfulness, or any other temperament, may be part of the biological givens, our starting point, but we're not stuck with it. There's a range of possibility even within genetic constraints. Critically, genes alone do not determine behavior.
That's huge. Our emotional capacities aren't set in stone.
Not at all. With the right learning, the right experiences, they can be improved. And this is largely thanks to how the human brain matures. Childhood sees the most intense growth. There's this process called pruning. The brain gets rid of unused connections and strengthens the ones we use often. Synapses form rapidly. So experience, particularly in childhood, sculpts the brain profoundly.
Like the classic examples, the cats and monkeys.
Exactly. Wiesel and Hubbell's Nobel Prize work. If you close one eye during a critical period, the brain circuits for vision from that eye just don't develop properly. Functional blindness. For humans, that critical window for vision is roughly the first 6 years, or those studies with rats, rich versus poor environments.
Yeah, the stimulating cages versus the boring ones.
Right. Rats in the rich, stimulating cages developed far more complex networks of synaptic circuits. Their brains were literally heavier, and they were better at mazes. And this effect, it is sure to occur in humans. Environment matters hugely for brain development.
Okay, so childhood is critical. But what about later? Can we still change? Well, psychotherapy is a pretty strong example, isn't it? It's like systematic emotional relearning. And it can actually change emotional patterns and shape the brain. Look at that study on OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Patients often have overactivity in certain prefrontal circuits. They split patients into 2 groups. One got standard drug treatment, Prozac. The other got behavior therapy. Exposure facing the obsession without doing the compulsion, like touching a sink but resisting washing, and learning to question the fears. Both treatments worked. Compulsions faded. But here's the kicker. P-scans showed the behavior therapy patients had a significant decrease in the activity in a key brain area, the caudate nucleus. Just like the drug group, their experience, their learning had changed brain function and relieved symptoms as effectively as the medication. And that's incredible.
It really is, and it ties into these crucial windows of brain development. Humans take the longest for our brains to mature. Sensory parts develop early, the limbic system emotions mostly by puberty, but the frontal lobes, the part for emotional self-control, understanding, making smart responses, they keep developing into our late teens, maybe even early 20s. 16 to 18 is often cited.
So adolescence is still a key time for emotional learning.
Absolutely. Habits of emotional management that are repeated over and over again during childhood and the teenage years will themselves help mold the circuitry. It makes childhood and the teen years this crucial window of opportunity for shaping lifelong emotional propensities. Think about critical experiences. Reliable, responsive parents, getting help handling distress and impulses, practicing empathy. But the flip side, neglect, abuse, parents being consistently out of tune with a child's needs, harsh discipline, that can also leave their imprint on the emotional circuitry, unfortunately.
What about learning to calm down? That seems fundamental.
Hugely. It's first learned from caregivers, usually in infancy. Between about 10 and 18 months, the orbitofrontal area forms connections for a kind of distress switch. Having stronger connections in this circuit for controlling distress leads to better self-soothing later. And there's the vagus nerve, the body's main calming pathway. Parents can literally modify their children's vagal tone, its efficiency, by coaching them emotionally.
How does that work?
By talking about feelings, helping them solve problems, suggesting alternatives to hitting or yelling. Better vagal function means kids are better able to suppress the vagal activity that keeps the amygdala priming the body with fight-or-flight hormones. And consequently, they were better behaved. The point is, these core emotional intelligence skills have critical learning periods extending over several years in childhood. Missing these windows makes corrective lessons later in life much harder. Not impossible, but harder. This massive sculpting and pruning in childhood helps explain why early hardships can have such enduring and pervasive effects in adulthood.
Okay, so childhood is clearly a massive opportunity. But it's not the only opportunity, right? The brain does remain plastic throughout life, maybe just less dramatically than when we're kids. All learning, fundamentally, implies a change in the brain, a strengthening of synaptic connection. So emotional habits are malleable throughout life with some sustained effort, even at the neural level. That's hopeful. It really brings home the impact of things like parental attunement, empathetic discipline versus just ignoring distress or yelling. And maybe psychotherapy, as you mentioned, is like getting a remedial tutorial for what was skewed or missed completely earlier in life, a chance to rewire.
Exactly. So if childhood provides these crucial windows, but the brain stays plastic lifelong, what does that really mean for us? What are the implications for our own ongoing capacity for emotional growth, for healing, whatever our age? It raises a really important question, doesn't it? If our emotional landscape is never truly fixed, what new possibilities might that open up for our own evolution, our well-being, even as we get older? Something to think about.